Today's lesson is on the power of words. What we mean by this is that words have power when used for positive reasons. Words can easily influence and brainwash in very negative lights. And in many cases, not using our words at all gives power to forces that we never even bargained to exist. Today, however, we're going to look at this in a much more general context. So there's an image here on the screen, and I think it really captures the tone of this lesson quite well. It's an image that's likely been inspired rooting all the way back to pre-World War II, when Adolf Hitler was coming to power in pre-Nazi Germany. And this is an image of a book burning. So you can see that engulfed in the flames are several books, and this was something that Hitler used in his quest for power. He basically took away the power that words had in written word here and eliminated them from society. And this was one of the methods that he took on to basically brainwash his society into believing what it was that he stood for and the values that he had and the goals that he had. Hitler is perhaps one of the most notable examples of a person who used his words for bad reasons. You can see him in the photo here on the left in one of his famous speeches. He's noted for being one of the greatest orators that history has ever known, and the power of his words and the power that his speeches had over his audiences to this day, few have been able to match the caliber of these speeches. In addition, World War II is a great example of the power of words. You can see on the right a picture of Auschwitz. And the sign above Auschwitz is obviously not written in English. It says Arbeit macht frei, which basically translates to work sets you free. And for many of the Jewish prisoners in the Holocaust, this motto or this phrase was kind of what kept them going. It literally translates to mean work sets you free. And this might have provided hope for some of the prisoners in these concentration camps, that if they just kept doing what they were being forced to do, that someday they would be set free. Now, looking back, this is something that many of us probably know never happened. Work did not set these people free, but perhaps these words provided hope and allowed some of these people to keep going. The Holocaust is a really interesting way of looking at the power of words. It essentially is one of the most notable examples in history of a person using words, in this case Hitler, to brainwash an entire nation to commit a genocide. And it was through things like propaganda and hate crimes that words were used to inspire hate. And it's a very sad and unfortunate thing. It still happens around the world. There have been countless genocides in which a powerful leader has brainwashed a group of people to commit atrocities against the human race. More recently, you might be familiar with the Rwandan genocide, and even today there's a form of a genocide happening in Syria involving several Middle Eastern nations, as well as Russia and the United States. I've got a couple of really interesting photos here on the screen. The first is a really famous saying that you might have heard. We often have been told that the pen is mightier than the sword. And this is a really neat image that kind of represents, it has an image of a sword as well as a quill, a writing utensil. And in many cases, this has been proven true. We often think of weapons like swords and guns and bombs as being the most powerful influence in the world. People are obviously afraid. They incite fear. But words have also been used as weapons and have evoked change in history. One of the more famous examples could be the 1918 Treaty of Versailles, which was signed at the Palace of Versailles in France and essentially ended World War I. You can see in this photograph here taken from a newspaper that the people involved are in the Hall of Mirrors, a famous part of the Palace of Versailles, and they are in the process of creating the treaty. Now, the Treaty of Versailles was obviously used with good intentions to end a world war, a war that had caused destruction across Europe for more than 4 years. However, the words in the treaty also had a really negative impact. Essentially, it was this treaty and the words in it, which basically stated that Germany had to take all of the blame for causing World War I, and also the words that said that Germany would be paying the price for many years to come. They would be paying this price in monetary repayments called reparations. They had to take their troops out of certain parts of their own land that were now being given to other nations. They were not allowed to have a military, no navy, no air force. And again, these words and this acceptance of guilt, which was forced upon them, incited World War II and paved the way for somebody like Hitler to come along and make a nation great again. He saw an opportunity and he took it. Again, you can see words have immense power. When I was in kindergarten, I remember our teachers often reciting the famous poem Sticks and Stones. You might remember that it goes, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me." And it wasn't until I was much older and I was going through my own share of bullying in middle school that I learned that that was so far from the truth. And I found this really interesting rewritten version of that famous rhyme. This one, however, is quite different. It goes, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can also hurt me. Sticks and stones break only skin, while words are ghosts that haunt me. Pain from words has left its scar on mind and heart that's tender. Cuts and bruises now have healed. It's words that I remember." And looking back on my own life, I realized that there have been a couple of incidences where somebody has physically hurt me. I remember in grade 3 getting into a tough in the schoolyard. But the things that I truly, truly remember and the things that have truly kind of stuck with me, not only in the sense that I remember them, but also in the sense that they impact me, are definitely the words. The things that people called me, the names that I've been called, the hateful things that someone has said to me, without realizing that, it's the heat of the moment and that once those words are spoken, even if they didn't mean them, that they can't be taken back. Definitely the words have had more of an impact. So I thought that this was a really thought-provoking rewrite of something we're taught as children that clearly has very little truth to it. I want to leave you with some examples of things that our words have the ability to do. When we use our words for good, words have the ability to inspire people. I became a teacher because I wanted to inspire people, and I've considered myself fortunate in that I think I have done that for at least a few people. Words can also save a life. There are countless issues right now with mental health, and suicide rates amongst youth are increasing dramatically. It is usually somebody who's, there to listen, or somebody who's there and happens to say a nice thing or the right thing that might be the difference between saving someone's life and allowing them to proceed forward in their depression. Words are also the foundation of education. Written word, books, those are the things that exist and have existed for hundreds of years to teach us what we need to know to be successful. We can also make someone's day. A compliment goes a long way, and often it is nice, kind gestures that people remember. Smiling is contagious. Say something nice, you can make somebody's day. We can also use our words to build relationships, and they say that open communication, talking to one another, whether it's a friendship, a parent-child relationship, or a romantic relationship, talking to one another is that foundation that's needed for success. Words are also things that you can use to build your self-esteem. Similarly, however, words can be used for really negative reasons, and some of these things are the complete opposite. Words can be used to scar someone mentally, and those scars often, as we learned in our nursery rhyme before, those scars don't go away. Words can also be the difference between life and death, and somebody who has been exposed to hateful words their entire life might be more likely to take their own life if those things have stuck with them and if that's all they know. Words can be used, as with the example of Hitler before, to brainwash other people. And usually brainwashing is not used to teach somebody good things. It's often used for the wrong reasons, but it can be really effective and really powerful. Words can be used to ruin someone's day. Words can be used to end or break a relationship. and basically dissolve that communication that's needed for success. It can also be used to dissolve another person's self-esteem. And you can see that in this picture here, there are tons of really horrible, horrible words that have been written all about this girl here. I thought that this was really important because we as a society have been taught that we shouldn't use certain words, racist terms, sexist terms. Those are things that we are constantly being told not to say. And we shouldn't be saying them, especially not in the context of saying them to someone else. But something that somebody mentioned to me a couple of years ago was that perhaps by censoring ourselves and censoring literature and telling one another that we shouldn't be using these words, we shouldn't be reading this book because it says this word. A good example is To Kill a Mockingbird. There's a really racist term in that book, and many people have tried to ban the book altogether, despite the fact that it has some really relevant lessons and it teaches tolerance and compassion. But sometimes I think that not using words gives more power to those words. And in that sense, by telling people not to use them, we're actually making them much more impactful when we do use them. So, using a racist term or not allowing a teacher to teach a book that has that term in it, even if it's the right context and it's taught properly, I think it teaches young people especially that not using this word, means that it's really, really, really bad. And sometimes I think that just makes everything worse. As I mentioned before, when we don't use our words, we actually can cause more power to a negative situation than there was in the first place. This is something called the bystander effect, and it's become something that psychologists and sociologists have studied frequently in modern society. This picture here kind of sums it up quite well. There's a man laying on the ground. We don't know from the picture what's wrong with him, but we see 4 people that are kind of ignoring the call to action that's happening here, and they're just walking away from what's happening. The first person thinks to themselves, he probably doesn't need my help. The second person thinks, he'll be okay. There's a man there in the middle who thinks that somebody else is going to help, so he doesn't need to. And the last person on the right there thinks, he must just be drunk. Something like this actually happened very recently in Oshawa. A man had been attacked and was left lying in the middle of a street. And he was there for several hours before somebody actually stopped. And he almost died. It was because of the actions of one person that his life was saved. But what's remarkable is that it took so long for somebody to help him. I would imagine that many people felt the same way that the people in this photograph felt, which is a pretty scary thing. Something that I've experienced as well. Once I was in a car accident. I was hit by a deer, and I was able to pull over, and there was a ton of damage to my car. I was okay, but I was very, very shocked and scared. And I sat on the side of the road with my hazards on, and there was clearly damage to my car, extensive damage. And I waited for the people I had called to come out and help me. In that time, I spent over an hour and a half on the side of the road, and not a single person stopped to help me, which I found appalling and horrible. And I've kind of made a vow to myself that from now on, in a very safe way, I will never do that. If I see someone that has clearly been hurt or injured, or there's some kind of a situation, I'm at least going to roll down my window and ask if they're okay, because it was one of the most horrible feelings to know that hundreds of people drove by me and not a single person could stop. So I think that kind of sums this picture up quite well. There's another really famous example of the bystander effect, and there's a really great TED Talk about this that you could probably find online just by typing in TED Talk bystander effect. And I think that this picture is actually supposed to be somewhat of a representation of this story. But essentially, there was a woman who was raped beside an apartment building. And there were several people inside the apartment who knew what was happening. And not a single person called 911. I think the reason was the bystander effect. And when interviewed about the situation, most of the people in the apartment building responded by saying that the reason that they never did anything, the reason they never helped or called 911 was because they figured somebody else would do it. And it's that mindset, although it is human nature, that sums up the bystander effect and causes this to happen. So keep that in mind. Keep in mind that sometimes not using our words can give power to a situation that shouldn't be happening or could be helped. Words can inspire and words can destroy. Choose yours well.